You're watching Leafs Morning Take with host Nick Alberga and former NHLer Jay Rosehill. The show starts now.
It is Tuesday, July 9th. We roar on here in the offseason and the summer. Nick Alberga and Carter Hutton. Not much has dropped in the last week since July 1, but what's going on, Huts?
Not much, buddy. You had to drag me away from the lake. I was swimming. I've been golfing, buddy, and now I'm back on the Leafs podcast. But I love it, buddy. I'm glad to be here, excited. Obviously, it's exciting times. You know, things are very optimistic after free agency.
Yeah, I hear you, bud. And I'll be quite honest. I tried to settle in for a couple of days after a busy month of travel in the month of June. And I find myself already bored. I feel like I've hit my climax in terms of Netflix and streaming and watching movies and series. And it's like, oh God, there's still like 92 days, I think, until like Leafs hockey is back. I don't know if I like that very much.
Yeah, it's okay. Enjoy the rest, buddy, because you know it comes quick. And one thing for this summertime, it's I think this is the time of year where, you know, the dust is kind of settled. There's a few free agents still out there, but most of their teams are set. And now we can really take a look at, you know, where teams are at, what they added, who made, you know, who was winners and losers right now. Everyone can pass your opinion on different teams and the Leafs and the way they're going to be set up going into next season. But, you know, time will tell. And I think that's the exciting time of this, you know, this time of year is the optimism of where your team's at and what they did or what they didn't do. You know, if you are pissed off, if you do like it, you know, time will tell. And in 90 days, we'll start to get a better picture of, you know, how that team's going to get it done on the rink.
What's been your general reaction as a whole before we get into the Maple Leafs? July 1, you've been part of the big day, even talking to a couple players around the league. They said it wasn't what they expected. It was a lot bigger than they expected. But what was your general reaction to everything that transpired around July 1?
Yeah, some big deals, you know, a lot of money given out, some surprising ones for me, some teams that kind of went off the grid and gave out some big deals. You know, I don't love what Seattle did with 7 years for Chandler Stevenson and for Brandon Montour. I didn't really see that one coming. I do respect the Nashville Predators for what they did. You know, they obviously overpaid for some older guys that are going to be old at the end of those deals. But I found like playing 3 years in Nashville, the way this team has been, they've always just tried to get by. They've never actually tried to make a push. And I feel like this is finally a statement to their players and their fans. Like, you know, we have Saros, we have Yossi, Forsberg. We're making a push, Ryan O'Reilly, to try to win. The Blackhawks, I like what they did. I think, you know, last year they tried to surround Connor Bedard with, you know, players that were just going to like be character guys, right? Foligno, Perry, guys that like, you know, been around a long time, where now they've actually added some guys that can help them be a little more competitive immediately. I also don't think that they handcuff themselves for the future. So it's been good. I like it. And for the Leafs, you know, you add a couple guys, we're going to get to it, but I think it was an exciting time and players got paid. The cap's going up and you can never knock that.
You can't. I'll be the first to say, however, it is July 9th, and the brain trust involved was preaching all this change, and I'm still waiting for this monumental change for this organization that it appears it is not coming. That was all lip service. We probably could have projected that, but they're running it back. Yes, the definition of insanity, they're running it back with the Big Four, and certainly we'll get into that conversation as well. You're right on Nashville. You're right on a bunch of these different teams. In fact, I'm doing like a recap episode for my NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast on Wednesday. So with a fine-tooth comb, I had to go over sort of what some of the teams have done. And yeah, that really stuck out. Utah getting Sergachev, Seattle, very puzzled by some of their transactions, getting Montour, sort of redundant when you have like a Vince Dunn in the fold. Even like a Matty Beniers, you bring in a Stevenson. It just seemed like, oh, we need to do something. Let's see if this works out. But I often say the biggest mistakes in NHL history usually made on July 1, or around it at least.
Yeah, and especially guys like that. And so for me, like I played with Brandon Montour. His game is run and gun, right? He went to Florida. He kind of got the leash taken off and he could fly. But now you're going to a situation where you don't have Sergei Bobrovsky either, right? You have Philip Grubauer, who was like the tale of two seasons, you know, over the last few years. You know, Joey Decord's come into his own, but he's not Sergei Bobrovsky. So I think a lot of his mistakes get covered up. So I didn't love that signing. I know it's, you know, he's the guy, right? They just won. You win the cup. You know, there's a chance to get signed. And some of these signings, I think the Stamkos one walking away, I still think that is going to be odd to look at when we see him in a Preds jersey next year. So there's a change of landscape in that sense. So it'll be good. And I also think for Seattle's standpoint, we touched on the start, I think being good early almost hurt them, right? It almost got
Yeah.
to the point where it's like they were expected to win, and then now they're trying to do something that they aren't instead of just like the slow growth process. But we'll see what happens. Stranger deals have been made that have paid off, but those ones I think are really big contracts to bite on them for them.
Yeah, I think Seattle's headed the opposite direction, quite frankly. But as you know, we're not here to talk about the Kraken. We were blessed with some breaking news about, I guess, 15 minutes before we started today's podcast, and that's that Wes Clark has been named the VP of Player Personnel for the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you do recall, he has been with the Maple Leafs organization for the past 6 seasons. Obviously, very tight with John Tavares, the captain, very tight with Kyle Dubas. And more often than not, in business, this does happen. It just took, I guess, a year, but he's headed to Pittsburgh to join Kyle Dubas.
Yeah, there's obviously a good relationship there in the sense of what Kyle Dubas has done with him beforehand with the Leafs. And I think there's a trust factor, right? And a lot of these guys, they carry on their guys. You see this all the time, especially with coaching staff, head coaches come in, get jobs. They want their assistants. They want their goalie coach. There's a communication factor. So obviously it's not great for the Leafs, but I also think with Brad Tree living there, he's going to want his guy, or he's going to find someone that's more suited for him. And, I think it stings a little bit in the interim right now. At least the draft is over. At least they went through this year. They're set up, and now he can get someone else there to work. But just another one of the Dubas, right? He's coming in. He's bringing guys over, and Kyle Dubas loves his guys, man. This is a guy that I feel like if you are in with, you are in. And it seems like he is super loyal without any really, necessarily, like he hasn't really won anything in the sense at the NHL level. But once you're in with this guy, he is loyal to you.
You know what kills me is there's a lot of fans out there that just think Kyle Dubas can do no wrong. And anybody attached to Kyle Dubas can do no wrong. And it's like this is such a monumental day for the Maple Leafs organization. I'm not disparaging or discounting Wes Clark's worth to the organization, but you're telling me there's nobody out there who can assess talent, draft talent. You move on. I think he's done a pretty sound job. Clearly, the last couple of years, we'll see on Danford, the first-round pick from this year. But obviously, the Easton Cowan selection was tremendous. But you just groom the next guy, right? I think obviously a lot's going to be made of this. Like, find me a different team in the league where a move like this is made and it causes this much hysteria. But it's going to happen in this market because, again, the attachment to who he was attached to, Kyle Dubas, and where he's going to join Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh. So I think the track record's pretty good on Wes Clark. I think it's important to stress he played a pretty big role, to my understanding, in bringing in John Tavares. They're really, really close friends dating back to their time way back when. And I think it's going to sting for the Maple Leafs, but let's not act like Wes Clark was like the second coming of Christ, okay? I think he did a pretty good job for this organization, but now it's time to find the next person.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes like the scouting is so well done now. Like there's really like the high-end picks are just the high-end picks, right? They're kind of going to go in place. It's pretty predictable. It's the guys that are getting picked in the late rounds, like the gems, the diamonds in the rough, which are even harder to come by now, I find. So I also think that there's so many hockey minds and so many people around the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's not like he's just leaving and everybody else has no experience, right? There's going to be someone else that fills in, whoever it is. And I don't think this is probably catching Tree by surprise by any means. No. I'm sure this is something that's been talked about for a long time. So I think you just wipe your hands of it and move on. But again, this is Leafs Nation, baby. And when anything happens, it's a big deal.
Yeah, we talk about it on the show as well. I think you give credit where it's due. I mean, he did oversee the drafts, getting Sandin, Durzi, Nyes, Amarov, Robertson, Cowan, Holmberg, Minton. I mean, there's some pretty good talent on that list, but most teams have prospects like that. And I think now the key for the Maple Leafs, Brad Treliving and company, is trying to find the next person who can find these talents, because I think it's so easy to pinpoint one person, but there's an entire staff, man. And again, I'm not discrediting the job that Wes Clark did, but the noise is going to be louder than normal and usual because it is Toronto.
Yeah, for sure. I've helped out a little bit with St. Louis with their goalie prospects. So I've done a little scouting, and it's almost like a round table, right? Experience that I went through. And for me, it was unique, right? In the sense of I can watch a goalie, like if I'm looking at an NHL goalie or a junior goalie, you can see holes in his games just from my experience or things he can improve upon. But it's tricky with the scouting in the sense of like, now I'm looking at kids that are getting ready for the draft and they're all very comparable. But now it's like, where do we find the improvement? How can we as a team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, as they're looking at guys, make him ready for the NHL, right? Because all these guys are good. Now that's where it gets tricky is, right, the development. That's where you have the staff that the sports psych and the different questions and the interviews to kind of figure out what kind of people they are. What were their parents like? You just need to find these kind of things out because that plays a factor in it. And there's so many different moving elements to it, not just Wes Clark. So I feel like this is something that the Leafs have in place and will continue to grow and try to get better with it. And it's always a moving target, right? Because the culture change, the generations change, and each kid is different. So it's a unique thing, I think, right now because of the personalities of the kid. A lot of these guys, I heard Jeff Merrick talk about it now, like at the combine and talking to kids in the draft, they're more confident than ever, right? They have like a chip on their shoulder where when I was younger coming into the league, you were almost timid. You didn't have that. Like you were kind of had to earn your stripes. So a lot of these kids want the entitlement right away. So finding a way to navigate that, to find kids that can become true pros in the NHL is definitely a unique job and a hard task.
So there you have it. Wes Clark out in Toronto, joins the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, reunited with the one and only Kyle Dubas. From there, we roll on to the conversation about Leafs development camp. I'll be honest, Hutz, you can speak to this more than I can. I don't know what to tell you. From what I heard, Easton Cowan is great. Fraser Minton was great. It was our first look at Ben Danford. Anything else to add here?
No, I don't think so. This is that's a tricky one. It's early in the year. A lot of the guys haven't been on the rink a ton. It's kind of just one of those things to get them involved, get them to understand what pro life is like and what's going to be expected, kind of get an example of where they are at, and then come to training camp, be like, this is where you need to be and some things you can work on. So I don't put a lot of stress onto development camp, to be totally honest with you.
That's fair. And I think the big two names in training camp in a couple months will be obviously the guys I just mentioned, Cowan and Minton. I think Cowan is obviously the guy that stands out. You look at the body of work, obviously in junior hockey this year, he was out of this world. How would you handle the youngsters, more specifically Cowan, heading into next season, knowing Tyler Bertuzzi is gone, knowing they haven't really replaced Tyler Bertuzzi, and knowing Cowan can play that type of role, but he's young. You got to be aware of that.
Yeah, I just think making the jump right away could be a lot, right? Especially in this market. We've seen it many times before where, he is a guy that, if he knocks your socks off in camp and he comes in and he earns that spot, that's one thing. But I also don't think it's a great idea to rush him in that sense, right? Where he might, need some seasoning, right? And just take some time to develop and get himself to a pro level, because all his success has been amazing. But now you're going to do it against grown men at the NHL that there's less space and time. Everybody's stronger. So, but he's set up he is set up to have success. I just don't want to see him get rushed. And then it's one of those things you look back and be like, I wish we would have handled this a little bit differently.
Yeah, I agree. I think they got to be very, very careful in this situation. I actually put out a piece on the LeafsNation.com earlier today about how my mindset has changed tenfold on Nick Robertson, where like a month ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I'm like, trade the guy. I think right now, from what I understand, the Leafs have been scouring the trade market for the last week, looking for depth up front. I think you just give this another shot with Nick Robertson and now Craig Berube at the helm, because ideally you're looking for a replacement option for a Tyler Bertuzzi. And at the best of times, we have seen what Nick Robertson can do. He's just another example of a young player, just 22, if you do recall and forget, that struggles with consistency. And I wonder if Craig Berube can be that guy to find it in Nick Robertson. So sort of that's my stance. And I do think it's intertwined with some of the youngsters who I think will get a legit shot to make this team. But again, I'd be very, very careful, everything you just stated.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's going to be important for Nick Robertson. The fact of the matter is that it's a different relationship now, right? Where Sheldon Keefe had his opinion of him. He struggled with some of his things, where with a new coach, it's more of a clean slate, right? Like guys are going to make his opinion on guys, and he's going to talk to GMs. He's going to have his insight. But I'll tell you one thing Craig Berube will do as a veteran guy is he going to make his own assumptions, right? This is something that's very common in hockey, right? Even when guys would get traded into your team, you'd hear shit about him. You'd be like, oh, this guy is a brutal guy, blah, 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 or he's high maintenance. Then you meet a guy and he's like unbelievable person, right? So sometimes you just get pegged with that, especially when you come up in that system. But I also think that people change and grow. And like, he's 22 years old. Think like how you were when you were 22 versus how you are now. Like, I think how I was at 30, let alone at 38, right? You're constantly growing and changing and evolving as people. So I don't want to like hold that against him, because he is one hell of a player, right? He might find his identity a little better under Craig. And at the same time, like, you're just looking for a replacement when you might have one sitting right underneath your hood.
The theme of this offseason will be run it back, and my thinking is pretty logical. If you think you can run it back because Craig Berube's in the mix with the core four, why can't you feel the same way about Nick Robertson, who's had so many stops and starts, and I think really floundered under Sheldon Keefe? The thinking is fair. Maybe Craig Berube, a new head coach, comes in, gives him a new mindset, gives him some renewed optimism and confidence, and he finds his way. If not, then I think you move on. I think at this point, when you look at Nick Robertson, I just don't think he has any trade value. If he did, I think he'd be gone by now. He requested a trade, but I think it's more so about playing time and an opportunity. And I think there's a pathway for that. Like, I know people in the chat are giving it to me a bit about being a Tyler Bertuzzi replacement. I don't mean the style of player, but I mean the role. I think they're looking for a bona fide top six guy, which I think we can agree Tyler Bertuzzi, when he's playing his game, can be and was. And I think Nick Robertson wants to be that guy. So I don't think you rush this whole thing where you need to find yourself a top six winger. I think you look internally, and down the road, whether it's a trade deadline, whether it's December, that's when you make the move.
Yeah, no, I agree in that sense, right? I also just think there's a little bit of pressure on Nick Robertson, probably from the factor of, like, you look at who his brother is. He's with him every day. He's training. There's no way. I think I've mentioned this before on the show. Like, it's got to be tricky, right? When you're in there and you think that you're not getting enough time or opportunity, and when you do get opportunities, you're scoring goals and you do pretty well in a limited role. So I think he wants to make that step forward, but it's tough, right? You have to adjust your game. You have to be able to play on the other side of the puck and do those little things to earn that opportunity to be on the other side of the puck. And there's one thing that I can tell after playing with Craig Berube under him in St. Louis. He was his assistant when I was there. But this is like a no bullshit guy, right? Like, he wants you to be accountable. He expects it. So I think this could be a great relationship, because honestly, sometimes my hockey experiences, when people bullshit you, or they, like, they tell you, hey, you're doing good, keep at it, like your opportunity is going to come. It's not helpful to the player, where I think maybe a little more black and white from Craig Berube to a young player like this might be something that pushes him over the top.
Hey, it's time for both sides to prove their worth, and that's why you brought in a new head coach in Craig Berube to maybe get something going a bit different in this room. And I use Edmonton as a perfect example. I mean, the first month and a half, they were dog shit. They bring in, obviously, the new head coach, and yeah, they fall short in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, but I think that tweak in mindset sometimes is all you need. At the Leafs Nation 401 here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button again at the Leafs Nation 401, where you could subscribe, like, Leafs Morning Take, wherever you find your podcast. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. The opening segment brought to you by Greta Bar YYZ. For a good time, find Greta at 590 King Street West. I walked by last night. That place is always bumping. Make sure to check it out. Weekly specials, live sports, over 60-plus arcade games. Let the games begin. Go big. Go to Greta Bar YYZ. So we haven't spoken in a while, Huts. It's great to get your analysis and opinion as per usual. What have you made of the offseason thus far for the Maple Leafs?
No, I think it's been pretty good, right? I also just think you're pretty handcuffed when you talk about the big four, right? You talk about these guys in the core four. Without that, like, I know it's everybody wanted, like, I had a few conversations with different shows I've done and things about, like, getting a stud goalie. Okay, well, where are you going to get the money for that? Where are you going to get this to? You got to kind of bring guys in. Tandem, OEL, like, I kind of like these deals. I think right now they immediately help you. These are two guys, one just won a Stanley Cup. And I think OEL, like, slotted in a better role could be beneficial. I think Tanev is going to come down to health, because he plays so many hard minutes. I think maybe, he becomes your top pairing with Riley. I'm not sure where they sit, but I also think that the D needed to get a little bit of a boost. I don't love the deals in the sense by the end of the deal, right? They're going to be, I have them at 38 and 37 when the deals are done, which is not great. But I also think this is a product of those core four, because where are you going to get guys that aren't, willing to take a little bit of a cut, or they give them a little bit more room in their no movement clauses, or what they can do to entice guys to come to Toronto when they don't have the money to give out. But I also think they're trying to win right now, right? This is a sense where, OEL, I think you look back, he was one of those guys you talked about as a big stud for a lot of years, right? I remember playing against him. He just kind of fell off a bit, but maybe in a lesser of a role here, he has a bigger impact on this hocky team.
Fell off a bit, man. The guy was a number one D in this league. He's like,
well, I'm trying to be gentle here.
Yeah, I know. I'm the guy who's a bit more severe with my analysis. I get it. You're closer to these guys than I am, but he has fallen off quite a bit. I do like the pickups. I talked about this last week. I still think the back end, to a degree, is incomplete. Please tell me what's going on with Yanni Hakanpää, because 9 days later, this signing is still not official. We know this guy's a mutant. We know he's a big body presence, but we know he's got a reported knee issue, so not much to report on that front. On OEL, I think you always have to be careful. I'm okay with the contract, quite frankly, at 3.5 per season. I'm okay with it. It's more so where he's slotted. I think in a perfect world, I'm doing a 5-6 look with OEL, and I wanted to run my first power play unit. I think that's the intrigue for me, is who's running PP1 now with Mark Savard at the helm. Is it going to be Riley again? Is it going to be OEL? But if you're expecting Oliver Ekman-Larsson to be like a top 4 bona fide stud, I think you're sadly mistaken. Like, I think he was sheltered in Florida to a degree. You talked about the strong goaltending. You talked about the cup contender in front of him in general. And voila, brand new contract. So I think if I temper expectations, I'll be okay with him. I mean, the analytics community loves Chris Tanev, but I think you hit the nail on the head. He gets hurt a lot. He plays that heavy brand. I think he's going to be huge for them in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I still think the back end is incomplete. I would love at least one more guy. And it's not like a Hakanpää type guy. I need like more of a higher end type guy. But those guys are hard to find. At least they got one right-handed shooting guy right now, right?
Yeah, it's important. And Hakanpää, he didn't even play in the playoffs, right, for Dallas, right? He was, the knee injury, whatever's going on. And for Tanev, like, I still think there's miles on that tread. Like, I still think he can play. It's just more managing his minutes come regular season, because he is a guy that can play well. He did it during the playoffs. He did a great job of shutting down McKinnon, playing well against Jack Eichel. He can play those minutes, and they're going to need that. But again, he's not the speedster. Like, he's slow, but he blocks shots. He can do all that. He is a warrior. But I also think there's some value in experience, right? OEL coming off the cup. But granted, obviously a different experience with Bobrovsky back there. It's tough. It's hard to find D, right? Again, when there's no money and the core 4 have so much money taken up, I think a lot of people don't understand that, where in the sense of like, well, we need to get D. It's like, well, you just can't. They just don't grow on trees, right? And if you're going to pay them, like, you're looking at what Montour just got paid, and some of these contracts are pretty huge for defensemen that are like top guys. So it's going to be tricky, I think, until something is stated. If not, maybe you just try to plug and play here, or find a guy, at trade deadline to kind of fill that hole, depending on how the season goes up to that point.
So let me ask you how you view this. So, suspecting it'll be Riley, Tanev. Benoit McCabe worked quite a bit last year in the second half, although, again, I'd be the first to admit, I don't know if I expect that type of season again from Simone Benoit. I think he's better suited to be a 5-6 guy again, like an OEL, than he is a 3-4. But hey, in a perfect world, he's going to be that guy who plays on a pairing with McCabe. And then I would go OEL and Liljegren. I still think there's a possibility Liljegren is dealt. But if I come back, like, how do you feel about that as a former netminder? Are you okay with those type of pairings?
Yeah, I'm not horrible. Like, the Liljegren OEL one makes me nervous, right? Like, I just think at times when Liljegren's off, he's way off, right? I feel like he lacks some consistency. And I think he can still find it, right? He's still fairly young, and there is that, maybe playing with OEL. And he's a guy that can drift away in the defensive zone as well, right? We've seen that many a times. And, what I do like is I like Benoit. I think he's going to take another step forward. I think that was a big growth for him last year. I also think what's really important that I hope people understand is, like, Jake McCabe really played out of his role last year a lot, right? Like, I feel like a lot was expected of Jake McCabe. So I feel like if he can find like lesser minutes in a better role, if Tanev can stay healthy and him and Riley, that pairing works well, I think Jake McCabe becomes your Swiss Army knife that can really help this back end, because he can do a good job defensively and fill in minutes when you need. But I also think last year he got overextended a lot because of injuries, because of the way things went down. So I don't hate the back end. I'm definitely not like in love with it when we start comparing it to some other teams. I think there's room for growth, and I really look forward to like Liljegren finding some more consistency with an extra year under his belt in the contract now, just to try to play freely. And I also think with Benoit, hopefully taking a step forward, because that was a really big year for him last year.
I really like McCabe. I just don't know where this is headed. He's a year away from UFA. Never hear from the guy. From all I know, very, very quiet. I think you know him. Again, my speculation, I don't know how he feels about this market. Does he want to play in a market this loud? That's just sheerly my speculation. But I think he's a guy I'm engaging in conversations on an extension with right now. Like, I like what I've seen from Jake McCabe.
Yeah, I think you do too. And trust me, he is a guy that behind the scenes, I've chatted with him to try to get him on the show, right? You know that, and he wants nothing to do with it. I don't know, maybe because it's just me, and when we played in Buffalo together, we got our ass kicked every game. But he's a guy he's a family man. He's from Wisconsin. He has his wife and his kids, and he likes to just hang out. He loves hockey and competing. He doesn't want the extra fluff that comes with it, right? The media, and it's a lot, right? I'm sure everywhere you turn, there's pressure, right? But I also think that for him, he's one hell of a hockey player, and he's a guy that off the rink does a lot too. Like when I talk about my days in Buffalo, like of course we didn't win, so I can't sit here and be like he was this and that, but it wasn't because of lack of effort in the dressing room and the character. He is a guy that wears it on his sleeve, and I think brings a lot of value to this hockey team. And I think he is a guy that's going to gel well with Craig Berube, like the way they, hold guys accountable and create a better culture.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's something we'll monitor over the next couple months is Jake McCabe, because, again, he is eligible for a brand new contract. And I think he's given a lot to this team. And I think Kyle Dubas deserves a lot of credit for bringing in McCabe, but also getting the, I think it was 50% retention on that contract. And to get McCabe at like $2 million is pretty damn amazing. I think he's got a lot of worth to this organization. And quite frankly, I'd love to see him re-sign. But that's your new back end. The big question I want to get to, because again, knowing your background in this awesome sport, the crease. So Anthony Stolarz comes in. We're looking at a Woll-Stolarz tandem. How do you feel about that?
I honestly think it's pretty good, to be totally honest with you, especially like with Woll's contract not really kicking in until next season. He doesn't make a lot of money this year, and you think about having him, Stolarz, and of course, let's not forget Thunder Bay's own Matt Murray too. I think another one that, Joseph Woll, obviously he's shown what he can do, right? He can play. He is a guy that can play in the big stage. He seems to be able to handle the pressure of it. The biggest thing is his, durability and staying healthy, which is a huge question mark on him. And something I think as a team where you need a guy to try to bring you over to the promised land. I think he is the guy. He has the capability, but he needs to stay healthy and he needs to play, I don't know if they run with him, if they try to do like a 1A, 1B here this year, like kind of what Boston did. Because Anthony Stolarz, again, is a guy who hasn't played a ton of games either. He's got 28 games played as a career high. He's played a lot more games in the American Hockey League, which is, obviously I don't want to disregard that by any means, but the American League is not the NHL, right? So I feel like this is a good mix and a pretty good signing, I think, at that price. So they have their goalies pretty cheap here next year. But I also think I wouldn't be surprised if you see Matt Murray at some point. You know what I mean? He just came off double hip surgery. I've chatted with him a lot. I know him very well. He wants to try to make a run back at this in the sense, right? So he might get an opportunity. Look at last year, the way Martin Jones came in. I don't know if it'll be along that standpoint, but at the same time, he's got a lot to prove this year too.
Yeah, I think all these guys have something to prove. And I love the motivation factor. I'd be the first to admit that I'm a bit skeptical, as you referenced, these guys can stay healthy. I think my big proclamation on July 1 is that Dennis Hildeby will see NHL time this upcoming season. And then you'd have to go 4 goalies deep for that to happen. But again, you would know better than me. That's why I lean on you for conversations like this. I think as the days go by, I feel a bit more positive about Anthony Stolarz. I think it's just so important to stress how good the Panthers were defensively, how good that team was in front of him. I'm not discrediting the Maple Leafs, but there's a reason that team won a Stanley Cup this season, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to expect a bit of a regression from Stolarz when he goes to the Maple Leafs, all the smoke that comes with being a Maple Leaf. I think you have to bake that into the finished product, if you will. But I still think the consistency can be there. And ultimately, I just want 2 guys to push each other. Like, there's no bona fide number 1 in my world. I think it's there for the taking for both guys. And may the best man win. But I like what they've done bridging the gap to Hildeby in a couple years, if assuming he's ready to be a guy, he can be an NHL guy. And then you sign the contract with Woll as well. Like, they have some options here.
Yeah, no, I like it. And I also think for Stolarz, he probably had options. I've been through free agency a few times, times where I was scraping to get a job and times where I had options, right? And I had good seasons I was coming off of. Obviously, I was never on a Stanley Cup team in that sense. I was with the Hawks as a third goalie, but not actually part of the team in that sense. So for him, I'm sure this is something that he wants to be a part of, right? He knows Joseph Woll. Similar when I went from Nashville to St. Louis when Jake Allen came in, because I thought that Jake was a guy, Brian Elliott had left. Jake was Jake Allen was a first-year starter. It was my chance to really like get in there and get a chance to play in the sense of, hey, if it doesn't go perfect, I'm going to be able to get leaned on a little more. And I kind of got that opportunity there, which opened more doors for me. So that's probably something that I think Stolar sees in the situation of Joseph Woll. He's a younger guy. He's never really had the keys to the castle. And when he has, he's got hurt or it hasn't gone as planned. So I think there's a chance for him to play. And I think Stolar's where he's at in that situation is something that he wants to. He doesn't just want to sit on the bench and open the door forever, right? So this is his chance to really play well. And again, it's easy to judge a guy by what he's done so far with careers games played and that. But at the same time, he's never really got that chance, and this might be the year here.
And I guess it just shows you yet again, Huts, how difficult it is to get a bona fide stud in this league. There's only a couple available on the market. Jake Markstrom goes to New Jersey. Our guy, Linus Allmark, goes to the Ottawa Senators. And it's the same old same where it's like we're going to get, I don't want to call them a stopgap option because I think Anthony Stolarz is a good goalie, but it's felt like 25 years since the Leafs have had a guy outside of, I guess, Freddie Anderson, but we all know how that guy performs or lack thereof in the Stanley Cup playoffs, where you knew what you were getting on a nightly basis. And I think the hope is there with Joseph Woll. It's a big-time hope. It's a big-time ask for a guy who's had the history he has injury-wise. You throw Stolarz into the mix. I get the Matt Murray signing. I think it's fair to bring him up. I think we're looking for a bounce-back season from him, but we also got to be fair with our analysis. The guy is always hurt. So I think that's going to be a big thing, too, is can these guys stay healthy? Like, I truly feel like this could determine, again, this Maple Leaf season is contingent upon these guys actually staying healthy in the crease too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something you have guys that have missed a lot of games. But having three guys, like you look at the last year, I don't have the numbers in front of me exactly, but I want to say it was close to like 100 goalies got used in the NHL last year. I don't know the exact number. I might have been over 100, which was insane, right? You look at all these teams early on. Remember when, Montreal had three, the Wings had their three. Everybody ended up getting used. And then it got to a point where these teams that needed guys, nobody wanted to trade their goalie away because they were worried about it. So I think having a little bit of depth with some guys with experience when you're paying Murray league minimum and like you're not have a ton of money in depth in the goaltending area. Because I think if you added it up right now, like Woll he's only making 700 and something next year. Murray's making 875. And then Stolarz is 2.5 cap hit or whatever. So there's really not a ton of money tied up in the goalie sense. So whoever kind of steps forward and gets the job done. But I'm with you, though, in the sense of it's hard not knowing what you're going to get, right? It's tricky when you stare at a ton of guys that have, like, I think a few years ago we looked at Bobrovsky and we said, like, what a shit contract. Like, it's going to kill Florida. Now you're looking at it like, oh, that was the best deal ever because he just won you a Stanley Cup. So it's goaltending is so – it's heat of the moment. You got to kind of ride the wave. It's pretty much, I think, in contract negotiation, you need to ask if you can get hot at the right time is pretty much the main thing.
Oh, exactly what it's become. It's become such a volatile position. And let's be honest, I mean, the Leafs aren't the only team shitting themselves when it comes to the crease and having no clue what's going to happen. Again, I've been doing research for my podcast tomorrow, and I remember Detroit has like 17 goalies going right now. They got Lyon, they got Husso, they got Jack Campbell, they got Cam Talbot. They got Sebastian Costa, who's like the next guy for them. But every team's looking for that next guy. And that there's a reason. I mean, let's just put it this way. There's a reason why the Predators never really put UC Saros on the trade market. When you have a guy like that, it's so difficult to give them up. And Saros re-signs with the Nashville Predators. Keeping in that conversation, that's where I wanted to head next. Did you see this whole thing about Ryan O'Reilly apparently trying to convince Barry Trotz, the GM, to trade for Mitch Marner?
I hadn't seen it until you mentioned it last night when we were talking about it a little bit. And
that's surprising, though.
Not really, like a veteran guy. Like I could see maybe where there's smoke, there's fire in the sense of like, he knew what was going on, trying to get in Trotz's ear. And Trotz is like a very approachable coach. I've never had him as a GM, but he is a guy that's going to listen to his veteran guys. He's going to get opinion on guys. And I could see Ryan O'Reilly going to bat for him. He probably understands how good he is. But in the same sense, like, I just don't know if there's going to be enough swing there to make that deal happen. But I love the fact that Ryan O'Reilly loves him, right? All the shit that Marner takes. So obviously this is a guy that knows how to win and thinks that Marner can help.
It's a pretty big vote of confidence. It truly is. I know Ryan O'Reilly had a cup of tea with this team, but I mean, the resume speaks for itself. Obviously, the attachment of Craig Berube, but he won a cup. I mean, the guy won a Conn Smythe as well. And so I think it puts a bit of stock in Mitch Marner's name. Obviously didn't come to fruition. The Preds went a different direction. They got Marchessault in free agency. They got Shea, and obviously the big one in Steven Stamkos, sinking him to a 4-year contract, for a total of $32 million. But I think this happens more than you expect, especially if players have the relationship that I'm sure Ryan O'Reilly has with a guy like Barry Trotz, who's coached in this league, is now a general manager. I think this happens way more than we think.
Yeah, oh yeah, they're always coming for opinions and thoughts, especially a veteran guy, right, who's been around, and especially trying to get character assessments too from players, right? Where it's important, it's different to get a breakdown from a scout who doesn't know shit about the guy off the rink or what he's like when you're going to a team dinner or what he's like going to be in the room. So I feel like that's important. So it obviously is a vote of confidence, I think, in the way Marner carries himself for a guy like that. Because trust me, like, Ryan O'Reilly is like the ultimate like guys guy, team guy. Like, he's a beauty, right? He is a guy that is, he'll have a few beers and pull his guitar out and sing a song. I've spent some time with him and had some fun with him. And the sense of, what you don't see on the outside, he's going to know what a guy can be like in the room and help a team win.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing about this whole Mitch Marner conversation, which we're about to get into now, is I know a lot of people, some feel he should go, some feel he should stay, some want him re-sign, some want to walk him to free agency. I get that. But the one thing as media and outside observers that we don't know, because we're not players, we're not in that room, is how Mitch Marner is regarded, how people feel about him, his relationship with the staff and all that. So you really can't make an assessment. But the more and more I hear behind the scenes, guys love playing with him. I know we talked to Braden Shen a couple months ago, who played with Marner at the World Championship, and he spoke glowingly about the players. So it's kind of interesting, the perception in the media as opposed to maybe what happens behind the scenes. And the vote of confidence, again, I think it's big coming from a guy of the stature of Ryan O'Reilly, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, obviously, like, there's enough to be said. Like, he's a guy that is a Stanley Cup champion. He is a Conn Smythe winner, and he played well, right? He's still done well. Like, obviously, there's so many other factors that go with it. And I think for Marner's sake, like, this is obviously something good, but at the same time, he's always going to be tied to this playoff or lack of success, right? I think all these guys are, especially making big money. As soon as you start making big money, that gets prioritized, I think, to the public eye over what you do in the dressing room or over what you do as a person, right? Like, you could be a horrible teammate, but if you're winning Stanley Cups and you find a way to win, that's kind of everything else gets washed away. So for Marner, I think the end goal here is to just be successful in the playoffs, no matter what it takes. But at the same time, like, when you're as good as he is, teams are going to want you and there's going to be good things. So I think the way he carries himself is amazing in the sense of being a good person, because who knows what goes on behind the scenes. But I also think that for Mitch Marner, the ultimate goal here to erase all this bullshit that follows him around is to have playoff success.
Yeah, maybe don't pull tantrums on the bench in the midst of a playoff game and just embarrass the fuck out of your team and yourself. But again, it gets back to the old conversation. Pardon the sarcasm. I know I mentioned in June that I would throw my computer that I do this show on out of my fourth-story building here in Liberty Village if Mitch Marner or the Leafs don't make a big substantial change. And here we are on July 9th, and nothing's coming, man. Like, they're doing this. They are seriously doing this, where their big move was Craig Berube, and I understand the lip service. I know, what are you going to say after the season's done? I laugh every year. The Maple Leafs parade themselves out in front of the media and say, yeah, we learned, we did this, we did that, we're close. I hate locker room cleanout day, and I hate the press conference that ensues. And here we go. It's like false hope, false promise. It leads me to wonder if Kyle Dubas stays in last summer, they're probably keeping the team the same. Like, it's one thing to say, yeah, change is coming. It's another way to execute it. And I guess the big change was Craig Berube. Again, I don't know what to feel about this. Part of me is like, okay, I want to see Berube give this a legitimate shot. Maybe it's time for a new voice, a new coach, and that changes everything. But something in me can't suggest that just because somebody fresh behind the bench is going to change these guys in terms of their approach in a playoff game. I just can't get to that level, Hutz.
Yeah, no, I agree. Until there's some sort of big change when it comes to the way that they play, like, I can't say, we can sit here and analyze this to death. Hopefully someone plays well or that goes good. But when you look at the structure of this team, I just don't see them being able to have playoff success with this top end heavy forward group that takes all the money without a heavy back end or guys that can really compete come playoff time. So it'll be interesting. The goalies So yeah, like I can't judge the goalies because sometimes, fuck man, look at the year Binnington came up and played so well and won the cup. And there's different years. Martin Jones, when he was really young in San Jose and brought them to the cup final. Like you can catch lightning in a bottle as a goalie. So I don't really worry about that as much, right? It's just the way this team is structured just doesn't really translate to me that they're going to be successful come playoff time again next year, no matter who's behind the bench, let alone even Craig Berube lights a fire over anyone's ass. I just think with this personnel, it's going to be tricky to be successful, especially in that Eastern Conference where it looks like there's a lot of teams that are still going to be pretty heavy and hard to beat.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, producer Vic is writing on our own personal chat here, and he makes a good point about if they had fired the coach as we wanted in January, I think we would have had way more answers right now, right? But unfortunately, guys don't want to use their bullets. Like that's a bullet to fire a coach and to bring in your guy, which has been done now. And ultimately, you're hired to be fired. I don't care if you're Brad Treliving. Maybe it doesn't apply to Brandon Shanahan because it's been a decade. And what has he done? And he's still here. But more times than not, you are hired to be fired. And I think coaches and people and personnel don't want to use their bullets. But I think it's a really good point because if you make that coaching change, you see what you have in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'll die on this hill. Pardon the quote from the lockout a decade ago. I'll die on this hill saying it's a definition of insanity to come back with these guys again. I don't care if fucking Bowman's coaching this scheme, Scotty Bowman. Like it's just not in my world. It's not going to work where it's like suddenly there's going to be a switch and we're going to find it in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I hate to say it, I don't want to be negative, but I feel like a year from now, we're going to be having the same conversation, maybe about the crease, more so about the big four and how they're unable to do it. Having said that, there's nothing left I want anyways. I'd rather keep the salary cap space. If you got to walk Marner to free agency, do so. If you got to walk JT to free agency, do so. They're going to get like $21 million in cap space and maybe reallocate those dollars coming up next summer. But I, for one, maybe I'm in the minority. I am stunned. I am absolutely stunned. We're sitting here on July 9th after that press conference, after losing in Game 7, after the no-show yet again for some of the big boys on this roster, on this team, guys who never get hurt but couldn't play in the Stanley Cup playoffs, unfortunately, that here we are again. We're going into another season. They're coming back with the same guys, the core guys. Nothing's really changed. I mean, you can tell me there's been change. There has been, but it's always the same thing. When you have the same nucleus, it's going to be the same results in my world, Huts.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just disheartening, I think, too. At some point, like obviously I joined the show 2 years ago, right? I started to step in. This was my first year really with the Leafs. And obviously I know everything that's gone on and I pay attention to it. But at some point, it just seems just like you can't get into the playoffs and just get waxed every year. You know, I think last year we look back on winning a first round against Tampa where realistically they weren't that great. You know, like they could have easily lost that series just as well as they won it. And then just to get whacked by the Panthers this year, just to get whacked by the Bruins, you know, they go to 7, but they can't score. These, like, especially when your team is built to score and you can't score, like there's a lot of red flags there. So I think as a fan now and as an analyst on the other team, like, fuck, something's got to change, Nick. And it obviously hasn't. And again, it's insanity. I agree. I think you're hitting the nail on the head.
Thank you for that. I will say, I think content-wise, it's going to be a lot of fun to document because we can run back all these stories I've been running back for the last 8 years. So I'm not completely disappointed about that. But again, I don't want to be that guy that says I told you so. But I think we're headed in that direction, and I think there's going to be a bullet to be used. And ultimately, it's not going to be trading, and ultimately, it has to be agreed upon by the Marner side. And maybe they've just told the Maple Leafs behind the scenes it ain't happening, and they've moved on. And so onwards we go until, training camp yet again. They're running it back with the core four. I just don't see a scenario now on July 9th. Most teams have made their key acquisitions for the offseason that a big trade comes out of nowhere. I guess never say never, but very, very unlikely. Connor Dewar elects for salary arbitration, Huts. I mean, I don't have much to say on the player, but one of 14 players who are scheduled to go to arbitration this summer. Maybe more so talk about what that process is like, what happens behind the scenes. And I think when you look at Dewar, I think he's a good depth piece. I'm not sure he's on my cup-winning roster, but I think he's a guy at the very least who competes for a playoff spot or competes for a roster spot in general on my fourth line. But I'm always looking for that upgrade.
Yeah, and I think the process of being able to do this as a player. It's your right. Obviously, they qualify him, and
Yeah.
that's a bump of 10% on his contract. He obviously thinks he's worth more. They think he's worth less. It's kind of a give and take, but as a player, you need to be prepared to go there and know that you're going to hear some bad stuff about yourself. Like, they are going to make a case about why you suck and why they don't want to pay you and all the flaws about how you are. And then your guy is going to go in and he's going to talk about how good you are and why you deserve this. So I think there's always that perspective going into it, that you need to be prepared not to let it burn a bridge here, right? Because the things that get said in there aren't pleasant, right? Where normally that would never get said to you when you're a part of a team and you're part of it. This is business. So for him, he obviously thinks there's value there and he can get it. And at the same time, for the Leafs, they think there isn't. So it'd be interesting. The numbers are always so far apart when they initially go into it. Like, one guy demands so high, they demand low, they meet in the middle, move on with it. But it's a player's right. And I guess we'll see where it lands. But I don't think this is a make or break guy for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Every penny counts. Dewar made, I believe, $800K this past season. They picked him up, of course, from Minnesota at the trade deadline. It sounds like he's he could make around, the projections suggest about $1.5 million per season on his next contract. And again, in a salary cap world, especially when you're paying David Kampf like $2.4 million, every penny's important. And that's why I understand the Maple Leafs perspective in this conversation. He played 23 total games with the Maple Leafs, 17 regular season, 6 in the playoffs, a goal, 5 assists, 6 points. But I really don't think he found his identity. Maybe it's a short sample size. Maybe it's a transition going from a Minnesota to a Toronto, and maybe you get a full training camp, and maybe he finds his spot in that lineup under Craig Berube. He's another one of those guys where I think right now, if I'm projecting, I'm pegging, I think he's a bubble guy. I think there's going to be a variety of different guys who are on the bubble. A lot of it will be dependent on Minton, dependent on Cowan, how they perform in training camp. But to sit here right now and tell you I want to give Connor Dewar $1.5 million to potentially not make this roster, I think would be lunacy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially on a guy that's going to be possibly in and out and maybe a filler role. So I think it's the right deal going to arbitration, for him to try to get his money. And
Yes.
the Leafs obviously trying to fight it, because you don't want to give up that money and then be handcuffed by it, right? Because again, like you said, who knows where the cap space is going to come from moving forward if they try to make a deal, and it could be 100,000 here or there that helps them make a deal. So I think for Connor Dewar, you have to go through with the process and deal with it. But as from the Leaf standpoint, as a guy that really is replaceable, you don't want to give up too much.
You don't. So we'll monitor that over the next couple months as well. I just think Connor Dewar is a guy who could be destined for waivers. I mean, a couple different things need to happen. But I think you want to see some internal competition. I think the kids will give that in training camp, and I think they'll make the decision easy or hard, for that matter, when it comes to the coaching staff and who actually makes this roster. Again, they continue to look for depth up front. I think easier said than done. You lose Tyler Bertuzzi. There's nobody really left on the market. You talked about it to start the show. Still a couple free agents left, like Tyler Johnson, Daniel Sprong, but there's not really a guy. I mean, you have that guy right now in Nick Robertson. I mean, there's no point in paying money to go sign a 1-year contract for a guy. There's not really a difference maker out there. So that's probably the way I would look at it right now. It's time for the last call, brought to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Hutz, I'm going to put you on the spot today. The Vezina Trophy next season. Any guys that you particularly like right now in terms of value? One guy I really like, Ilya Sorokin, in a bounce-back season.
Oh, yeah, that's a good pick here. I think the two for me, if I had to take one, I just think Jake Ottinger's going to have a bounce back regular season. I think he's going to play a lot better than he did. And the other guy that just seems like he's absolutely out of this world, not really that far of a stretch with his contract year coming up, would be Shesterkin. I think if I was going to take two guys, it would be him, man. And outside of that, maybe a bit off the grid, not really. If he can stay healthy, I think Demko's ready to make that jump.
Do you think we see a time like 15 years from now where it's like the Vezina's handed out to more than one guy? There's not really any number one. Like there's number ones, but I think we're headed in the direction where maybe in 15 years there isn't going to be like bona fide number ones anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. It's changing so much, right? Where the guys aren't playing as many minutes and they're trying to manage guys differently.
Yeah.
Right? It's rare to see guys play 60 games anymore. So I think it's just the wear and tear and how hard practice is and how hard everything goes into it, right? Like Marty Brodeur came out and I remember talked about that, like saying we're soft now and all this bullshit. And like times have changed, Marty. Like you were carrying a barrel around with you when you're on the ice. So it's one of those. No, but it's one of those things, man. The game's changed, right? You have to be like it, and there's more demanding. These kids have way more pressure on them, especially with the way they play the position now. You see so many more young kids like with hip injuries, with knee injuries, with things going on because of wear and tear. So there's a reason they have like these sports science teams. It's to manage it and to try to get guys to peak at the right time.
How dare you throw shade at my all-time hero, Martin Brodeur?
It's mine too. I love him, but I just think like you can't be like just because they're young punks that they don't know, like they're not as hard as I was, you know?
Yeah, no, I get that. The position has changed tenfold. There's more stress behind it, and volatility has never been higher when it comes to the crease. So, Huts, we'll leave it at that. I know a lot of people asking, saying, I thought the podcast was over. It is not. We're phasing down summer programming. The title of today's podcast, Summer Vacation. Rosie's on vacation right now. I'm going to take some vacation at the end of August. You're going to take some vacay. We're all going to chill, decompress a bit. But we are going to continue on. 2 more podcasts this week. You got one coming up on Thursday. You're going to drop by as co-host. And then on Friday, Matt Larkin, a Daily Face-Off, will co-host. And then the second half of July, we're going to go down to 2 podcasts a week. And then I believe in August, 1 podcast a week. So we want to be with you a bit, but not like exclusively throughout the summer. I think a little sprinkle Leafs Morning Take will never hurt anybody.
Yeah. Just keep up to date and see what's going on. And, you know, news comes in, right? Even today, something hit right before we came on. So who knows? And we'll do our best to break it down. If not, we'll find something to talk about. There's always something juicy out there, Nick.
Yeah, it's exactly it. If something does break, you know where to find the news. So I'll hit you up with some quick hitters. I'm not really doing that much here in the summer. So if something breaks, I'll be there with some breaking news for you. But at the Leafs Nation, 401 on YouTube as you watch right now, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It would help us immensely here in our pursuit of just great things overall for Leafs Morning Take and the Leafs Nation brand. Leafs Morning Take, wherever you find your podcast, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com. Thank you to producer Vic. I know Tammy, one of our great listeners, a bit hungover today, so thanks for bearing with us. I know those Monday nights can creep up on you, Tammy. So stick with it. We'll be back on Thursday, folks. Thank you to everybody involved here. Thank you to producer Vic. For Carter Hutton, I'm Nick Alberga. Talk on Thursday. Take care, everybody. Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long-form interviews. We got clips. We got epic rants by Jay Rosa. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.